When people imagine resistance, they usually picture weapons, explosions, secret meetings in candlelit rooms, coded messages passed under tables. But one of the most dangerous, underestimated forms of resistance is silence. Not the kind that comes from fear or confusion, but the kind that is chosen deliberately, moment by moment, under pressure designed to break a human being apart. That's what makes this story so unsettling and so powerful. Because at its core, it isn't about fighting back with force. It's about refusing to give the enemy what they want most: information, control, and psychological victory. By the time the Gestapo arrested her, they already believed they had won. That was how the machine worked. Arrest wasn't the end of the hunt. It was the beginning of extraction. The Gestapo didn't rely only on brutality. Even though brutality was always waiting in the background, their real weapon was certainty. They believed that everyone talked eventually. Pain, isolation, exhaustion, fear for loved ones. Something would crack. Silence, to them, was just a delay. But what they didn't account for was the kind of inner preparation that had already taken place. Long before the cell door closed, she had joined the French resistance knowing exactly what the risks were. This wasn't romantic rebellion. It was logistics, discipline, and constant danger. Messages had to be carried. Contacts had to remain compartmentalized. You were trained not just in what to do if things went right, but in how to behave when everything went wrong. One of the first lessons drilled into agents wasn't how to fight, but how to endure. If you're captured, you don't improvise. You don't negotiate. You don't try to be clever. You say nothing. Not a partial truth. Not a small detail. Nothing. That sounds simple when spoken out loud. In reality, it's one of the hardest decisions a human being can make, because silence isn't just the absence of speech. It's a constant, active choice. Every question is a test. Every threat is bait. Every pause is designed to make you fill the space with words. Interrogation began the way it always did. Controlled, almost polite. Names were mentioned casually, as if they were already known. Locations were suggested, not demanded. This wasn't kindness. It was strategy. The Gestapo wanted her to believe resistance was pointless. That her network was already compromised. That speaking would only confirm what they supposedly knew. All she had to do was nod, clarify, help them, clean things up. Quote. Her response was silence. Not dramatic defiance. No speeches. No insults. Just refusal. That kind of silence is deeply unsettling to interrogators because it breaks the script. Power depends on reaction. Threats depend on fear. Questions depend on answers. When nothing comes back, the system has to escalate. And it did. Isolation followed. Days blurred together without time markers. Food became irregular. Sleep was interrupted deliberately. This wasn't random cruelty. It was psychological erosion. The goal was to detach her from her sense of reality. To make her doubt her own memories, her own resolve. Silence becomes harder in that state because your thoughts grow louder. Doubt creeps in. You start imagining the consequences of holding out. You imagine people suffering because you didn't speak. Even if, logically, you know speaking would only make things worse. This is where silence stops being passive and becomes moral. Because she wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting people she might never see again. Couriers, radio operators, families hiding strangers in their homes. Entire networks depended on her not giving up even a single name. In that sense, every moment of silence was an act of loyalty repeated over and over again. The Gestapo eventually abandoned subtlety. Interrogation turned physical. Pain is designed to narrow the mind. To make the immediate moment feel like the only reality that exists. The body screams for relief, and speech feels like the quickest escape. That's why torture isn't about truth. It's about control. People will say anything to make it stop. And yet, she didn't speak. Not because she felt no pain. Not because she was fearless. But because she had already accepted the outcome before it happened. That's the part most people don't understand. True resistance in these moments isn't about optimism. It's about clarity. She knew that once she crossed the line into cooperation, even slightly, there was no going back. The Gestapo wouldn't stop. They never stopped at one answer. Silence, paradoxically, was the only way to limit damage. There's also something deeply human here that rarely gets talked about. Silence became a way to preserve identity. Interrogation tries to reduce a person to a resource. A container of useful information. By refusing to speak, she refused to become that object. She remained a person making choices, even in a place designed to strip choice away. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks. The Gestapo grew frustrated. Their authority depended on results, and silence produced none. Files remained incomplete. Networks stayed intact. That kind of failure mattered, especially in a system obsessed with efficiency and dominance. Her refusal didn't just protect others. It actively disrupted operations. Raids didn't happen. Arrests were delayed or never made. Safe houses remained safe. What's striking is how ordinary her resistance looked from the outside. No dramatic escape. No last-minute rescue. Just a woman sitting in a chair, refusing to answer questions. And yet, the impact of that stillness rippled outward, affecting dozens, maybe hundreds of lives. Eventually, the Gestapo had to accept something they hated admitting. She wasn't going to talk. That realization is a kind of defeat. It means the system has encountered a limit it can't cross without exposing its own emptiness. Violence can destroy a body. But it can't manufacture cooperation when someone has already decided who they are. Her silence became legendary not because it was loud, but because it was consistent. There was no moment where she almost gave in. No partial compromise. Just the same answer every time. Nothing. After the war, stories like hers didn't always get the attention they deserved. They lacked spectacle. They didn't fit neatly into narratives of victory and liberation. But among those who understood the inner workings of resistance, her contribution was undeniable. Entire operations survived because one person chose silence over survival. And this is where the story stops being just historical and starts becoming personal. Because most of us will never face interrogation rooms or occupying forces. But we are constantly pressured to speak, explain, justify, comply. Silence, in its own way, is still a form of resistance. Choosing not to betray your values when it would be easier to do so. Choosing restraint in a world that rewards noise. Her story reminds us that strength isn't always visible. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like saying nothing at all when everything inside you is screaming to make it stop.